Hey there everybody. It is Saturday, February 21st, 2008, and this is Scudder for Christ. And today I am out in the shop. I planned to do this video outside, but it's pouring down rain. So I came in the shop and I'm holding the cam, so if it's shaky, I'm sorry. Wanted to do a video about living in the country. There are a lot of people who I have seen talk about on videos and outside of YouTube actually, who have been talking about wanting to move to the country because of all this economic stuff going on, and they feel like that they will be safer and that maybe things in the long run will be easier for them if they move to the country. And I just wanted to give everyone a little bit of a perspective about moving to the country. When I was born in a major metropolitan city, and for most of my life I lived in big cities. Now, I did a lot of growing up when I was younger as a child in the country, and that was due to my parents divorcing and my dad moving back to his hometown, and so I spent a lot of summers and weekends in the country. Even though I had lived part of the time in the country, just growing up, I never really understood what it meant to live in the country. And so when I made the choice to move down here to take care of my dad, I was in for a really, really big culture shock. And that's the thing that I think that a lot of people that are city dwellers don't realize about the country, is that life in the country is very, very different. Now, there is a great book by a lady by the name of Carla, and it is called The Encyclopedia of Country Living, and I will link it over there for you. And you can also find it on eBay and Amazon for anywhere from about $20 to $30. I recommend, if you are thinking about moving to the country, you want to get that book. It is an excellent, excellent source. And she walks you through the steps of beginning to think about moving to the country and things that you need to think about and decide on, and all of the aspects of actually living in the country. Country life, once you have been around it for a while, is actually, in my opinion anyway, is probably one of the best ways to live. But I will be honest with you and tell you that if you are from the city and you have never spent a great deal of time in the country, you have got a big, big culture shock coming for you. And that was one of the hardest things that I had to learn, is that things were much, much different in the country. If you think that you're going to come to the country and that everything is going to be exactly the same way it was, as it was when you were living in the city, except for just a little more peace and quiet and a few more birds chirping, oh no, my friend, you are in for a rude awakening. There are a lot of aspects to country living that people don't think about, nor do they realize. Some of the things that I had to get used to were, one of the biggest things was being more closed off from society. I was used to being in big cities, and I had conveniences 24 hours a day. Stores were open 24 hours a day. I could go anywhere I wanted, do just about anything that I wanted to do any time of the day or night. And when you live in a country, rural area, that is not so. Let me give you just some examples. When I lived in the city, if something broke down or needed repair, then I would just simply call somebody to come fix it. If I lived in an apartment, I would just call the apartment manager and say, hey, I've got something broke, I need you to send maintenance. But when you live in the country, you don't always have that option. So you have to learn how to fix things on your own. Now, I'm going to flip the camera around and show you just a few things while I'm out in the shop, and this will kind of give you an idea. Let me swing this around. Now, and I'm going to walk over here. When you live in the country, you have to learn how to use all kinds of stuff. You have to learn to use tools, all kinds of tools, things like that, things like those right up there, and I bet there are a lot of people who don't even know what those are. You learn to use handmade stuff like this. You learn to use things like that down there. And you swing around. You also have to learn how to use that kind of stuff and that kind of stuff. And you also learn very quickly that you start hanging on to all kinds of stuff. You start hanging on to screws, you start hanging on to nails, you start hanging on to any kind of junk that you can to use to fix stuff. Now, the reason for that is because a lot of times if something has to be repaired, then it is entirely up to you to fix it. And if you are not willing to learn that, then you will not survive in the country very long. Another thing you also want to think about if you are considering moving to the country is that country people have a tendency to be very peculiar in some ways. By far, I will say that people in most rural areas are very friendly. That is something that I have experienced. I lived in Boston, for example, for a while, and not anything against people from Boston, because I did meet some very nice people there, but people were so busy there, people didn't have time to stop and say hi. They didn't, or as we say howdy. They didn't have time to stop and talk, things like that. So people in the country tend to be more laid back, and you will find that people are very friendly, but they're also very, very peculiar in the respect that most people that live in the country tend to protect their properties, and they protect their business, as we say, their personal business, and you end up running into some very odd characters, and you have to learn how to deal with the mentality of people that are in the country. There are a lot of people who if you're from the city, you may just sit and chat up and all that, but there are a lot of people in the country who, unless they know you, that would probably not be a very smart thing to do. There are good people that live in the rural areas in the country, probably some of the best people on earth, but until they get a chance to know you and know who you are, they're going to be very, very suspicious of you. And that's just the way that country people are. So you need to keep that in mind if you're ever considering moving out to a rural area. You need to give yourself time and give your neighbors and your other town folk time to get to know you and get a chance to figure out exactly who you are and what you are about, because until they do, they are always going to look at you just a little different, and they're not going to trust you. Another thing you might want to consider about living in the country is that if you live in a really rural area, then you are going to have to learn to deal with wild animals. And if you have a problem with animals, then you need to seriously think your options, because that's just a way of life in the country. I know here we have things like coyotes and foxes. We have deer. I have deer that come all the way up into the backyard, almost all the way to the house. And a lot of people will say, oh, that's really sweet. Oh, man, I would love to see that. And that's great. And they are beautiful, especially when they've had babies. But if you are gardening and you have a deer problem, then you've got a major problem, because the deer will eat your garden, and before you know it, everything that you have planted will be gone. So you have to learn to deal with wildlife. You also have to deal, in some instances, with stray dogs. I know in our area that's a problem that we have, because we do not have leash laws here, so everyone just about lets their dogs run wild in the yard. And I'm a big animal lover, and I end up Seems like I end up half adopting half of the stray dogs in this area, but it can be a problem because dogs will tear up all of your stuff, so you have to deal with that. Another thing you have to deal with is snakes. If you are not a snake person, if you're going to move to the country, you better learn really quick how to deal with them, because it's just a way of life. When you live in the country, you're going to have snakes, and sometimes they can even get in your house. So it's just a fact that you need to think about, because it is something that you will have to deal with.